Well, you've advised various governments, businesses, and investors. So let's talk about those for a moment. You've advised them on hydrogen and other clean energy technologies, and you're a listed author and co-contributor to no less than six World Bank reports. So, what would you, or what are you telling governments and investors now about the opportunities and the actions in green hydrogen?
So I think the first thing I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of, as it were, give them a realistic sense of timeline. I think people have very poor perceptions of timeline. So, I'm telling people if you want to have, a multi-gigawatt green hydrogen production facility in the UK, you can't just go from a few 1 megawatt plants straight to 1 gigawatt, and you're not going to get to 1 gigawatt by 2025. You're going to have to build some 5 megawatts, some 10s, some 20s, and you need to think about what kind of market that means, right? It's probably going to be more distributed. So how do you build that? And if you're going to have this early network of distributed and then longer term, these larger sites, how are you going to integrate those two elements together? I think there is then a misperception around the idea that electrolyzer companies can snap their fingers and suddenly have 20, 30 gigawatt of manufacturing capacity. I mean, they're very good, but they're not, that good. And there is a need to understand the scaling up. And I think rightly governments are saying we want to make sure that jobs are in the country and they want to try and encourage some supply chain. And I think COVID has helped a lot of people to realize that, not just from a social acceptance perspective, because there is a price and public support cost to the green energy transition at the moment, but also just from a safety perspective, people want to have the supply chain there, but they need to understand how you build that. And how do you build that? Well, if you want to encourage the supply chain to start somewhere, you've actually got to generate demand domestically. We were interviewing the governor of New Mexico on the Everything About Hydrogen podcast recently, and one of the things that they're trying to do is build a local demand in New Mexico. And I think, policymakers in Germany have understood this. I think the European Commission has been very good in thinking about this. I think in the UK, we haven't, frankly, been good enough. I don't think the government gets the idea that you do sometimes have to spend money in the early stages to build a supply chain. And if you were to look at the history of feed-in tariffs in Europe, they're much maligned by a lot of politicians today who got, to be fair, a very hard time from publications like the Daily Mail or the Sun or a lot of populist tabloids, but they were very effective. The UK built 40 gigawatts of renewables in a decade using feed-in tariffs as the primary mechanism. And most of Europe deployed, again, hundreds of gigawatts of renewables as a result of feed-in tariff mechanisms. The market does need, I think, simplicity at this stage. We're trying to integrate hydrogen into new systems. We're introducing new regulatory environments, new safety measures. And I keep telling governments, the key now is simplicity. Make it simple, be reactive, and think about, if you want a supply chain, how are you creating the jobs? Because that's the other key bit. Like, how are you actually educating young people to come through to believe there will be jobs? How are you retraining older people to be able to access those jobs? And then what is the pipeline for them going forward? I think it's great to set targets. I think that's really important. I think that's the one thing that the UK and the government strategy do very well. But then you have to follow that up. You can't just say we're going to have 20 to 30% of all UK energy is going to be hydrogen by 2050 and then go, but we want 5 gigawatts by 2030. Because you start looking at those two things and going that these just do not make sense. It doesn't align. There is a gap here between your narrative and your ambition. And I think investors are smart enough to see that. And so I keep advising governments, you just need to think about this. You need to be open. And companies also, need to go to governments and be very transparent about what the challenges are too. So I'm also encouraging people in industry, don't hold all your cards to your chest. Go out and talk to government because they need our help and we need to help them.